Good afternoon, and welcome everyone to this sixth session of our series of webinars on climate action in the Caribbean. So I am Lisa Perch with Saidi Consulting, and I'm your moderator this afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this session that's part of a series by USAID Eastern and Southern Caribbean Regional Climate Summit. This symposium comes at a very important time globally, regionally, and nationally. The US government has demonstrated its renewed commitment to fighting climate change, joining the Paris Agreement in January of this year. In the Caribbean, the need for climate action is particularly urgent. We recognize the importance of strong partnerships for regional climate action, and we have organized this symposium to join forces to not only share information and best practices, but also to identify the challenges that will require us to work together to identify and to implement those solutions. This is 6 of 8 webinars that are being held as part of this series throughout June and ending on June 30th. Over the course of the symposium, we have been listening, and we will also be benefiting from listening this evening from a variety of perspectives. Throughout the series, we've heard from climate scientists, youth activists, policymakers, and hopefully we'll also be benefiting from your inputs and your insights as our audience. The session overview is as follows. The session focus today is youth impact and engagement on climate change. We'll hear opening statements from each of our panelists, and their names are up on the screen right now, and I'll introduce them more formally a little bit later. Then I'll transition to asking them some questions, and then we'll also have time for questions from the audience. First up, before I introduce our panelists, we are going to have an audience poll. I'm going to read out the questions, and we will have those up hopefully shortly. We have 2 questions, and we're going to have about 1.5 minutes for
recording
responses.
In progress.
So the first question is up, and it's, what are some of the key priority areas in 2021 for accelerating climate action by governments as well as youth-led organizations? Here are your options, and we look forward to getting your feedback. All right. This is our poll results for question number 1. And so we have some clear responses. I think our most popular choice is improved adaptation and mitigation planning processes at the national, sectoral, and local levels. We also have access to funding for youth-related climate initiatives, as well as regulatory reform, looking at environmental assessments, inclusion in public financial management systems, and community engagement. We also have some takers for capacity building to influence decision-making processes and investments in technologies. So thank you so much for that feedback. Great. So then we're going to put up our second question, I believe. And it is as follows. What would it take to successfully bridge the gap between youth and policymakers? Very good question. And you have 5 options. And again, we're looking forward to your feedback and your insights. Please be as honest and direct as possible. We really want to know. And I think, again, some of these we'll try to think about and reflect upon in the session. And we hope that we'll touch on some of this via the great insights from our 3 panelists today. I take this opportunity to also thank USAID, Eastern and Southern Caribbean Mission, and the staff, and also Environmental Incentives, part of the team that's really helped to coordinate, facilitate, and organize these sessions and these seminars. And we'll be continuing to do so over the next 2 sessions after this one. Okay, so we have got our results up, and we have a big front leader, enhancing access for youth from vulnerable and marginalized populations, example, poor, indigenous peoples, persons with disability, to decision-making processes. The next 2 are increased access to formal policy and decision-making processes, as well as greater youth engagement in political representation and leadership. Then we also have leveraging the skills and out-of-the-box thinking that youth possess, as well as more youth-focused public policy initiatives. Great. Thank you again, everyone, for participating, and let us know how you think. So it is now my pleasure to more formally introduce our panelists. We've got a great group of youth panelists here with us today and activists. And before they make their opening statements, I'd like to just formally introduce them. First, we have Janelle Tomlinson, who's a PhD candidate at the University of the West Indies, a member of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network in Jamaica. Smile there, Janelle. Then we have Vaughn Xavier Jamir, who is a community associate at Student Energy and is also a Caribbean Regional Coordinator for the 16th UN Climate Change Conference of Youth Global Affairs Unit. He is from Trinidad and Tobago. Vaughn Xavier, welcome. And last but certainly not least, Javanik Henry, who is a special envoy on climate change for the Caribbean Youth Environment Network. He is a member of CYEN St. Lucia. Welcome, Javanik. Great. So I'm just going to now invite them one after the other to make some brief opening statements. And so I welcome Janelle to make her statement. Janelle, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Again, Madam Moderator, seeing you 2 days in a row. I'm happy. So again, I've been provided the opportunity to share. So today, the topic is a bit different, and it's more about youth engagement and, the kind of impact that climate change has and continue to have on, young people. And as a young person myself, I speak not only from experience, but as well as the experiences of my peers. When I say that oftentimes when we think about climate change, we think about it sectorally. So we think about it maybe from an agriculture or tourism standpoint. We think about adults and, how their lives and livelihoods are affected, without even recognizing that, with each of these sectors being impacted, with a lot of the workforce being impacted, youth, young people, children are affected as well. So I'm happy that now there is this kind of ongoing conversation about youth and not only how they're impacted, but the role that they have to play as agents of change. The UN recognized young people as constituents in this overall climate change conversation. So I do see the significance, of having us in platforms such as these to share our experiences. When I think in particular about Jamaica, where so many of us rely, as I said yesterday, on livelihoods that rely entirely on the environment, whether it be tourism or agriculture, we do see where when parents are impacted, when cousins and aunts, end up not being able to have an income because of a drought, not have an income because of a hurricane or a storm, then we do see how as a result youth are impacted. They either have a challenge going to school, they have a challenge where maybe the schools have to be used as shelters in the event of a storm. We therefore see again where in a farm household, when there's less food because of a pest outbreak due to a sudden hazard or due to a certain stressor, then again, children oftentimes have to not be able to attend school. And then there are also instances where there's less food in the household as well. So indeed, they are again impacted. And, interestingly, I'm happy for the momentum that I'm seeing build not only in Jamaica, but in the Caribbean as well, where youth are kind of taking charge and, emerging at the forefront of action. Javanik and Vaughn, I have engaged with them in different spaces, and I know that they will also be able to speak to, how youth in their country are now recognizing that, we have a role to play. Oftentimes we're seen as young as and inexperienced or as young people who are being influenced. But I'm happy to say that, this emerging momentum, this emerging conversation, these emerging, kind of spaces are giving us the opportunity to speak on impacts, to speak on what we're seeing happening in our countries, and to kind of highlight what we consider to be important and how we want to contribute, to the solutions and to the on-the-ground, community-based, also indigenous, youth-led activities going forward. So I know that the questions will delve a bit more and provide opportunities for us to speak to, specific interventions and barriers as such. And so I will close with that for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janelle. That's a great start to our conversation this afternoon. And I now give the floor to Vaughn Xavier to continue and to share with us a little bit about himself and, what he's doing and what he thinks about this topic area. Vaughn Xavier, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Vaughn. I studied environmental science and sustainable technology at the University of the West Indies. And I'm quite passionate about achieving a sustainable future for all life on Earth. I approach this through a lens of sustainable energy, environmental monitoring, and conservation on biodiversity. Sorry. So as a student, I was involved with many environmental organizations throughout Trinidad and Tobago, and took action to empower youth to get involved with achieving climate justice. We did this through so many grassroots events, plus getting involved on a governmental level in some areas as well. Very hard to get there in Trinidad. So I'm now the community associate at Student NG, which is one of the organizations I got involved with. And Student NG is a global youth-led organization empowering youth to accelerate the sustainable and equitable energy transition. We work with a network of 50,000 young people from over 120 countries to build their knowledge, skills, and networks they need to take action on energy. At Student NG, we operate a unique youth empowerment model. That means we have initiatives that are co-created with young people, for young people. We have consistently found that when young people are empowered to take action on energy and have access to decision-making spaces, they're able to raise the level of ambition in that space. Today, I'm excited to talk and hear from and learn from one of the most important untapped resources for achieving a sustainable future, the power of young people. It is the potential of 2 billion young people who are mobilizing in ways the world has never seen before, and who are demanding governments to wake up to the reality of the climate emergency and mobilize in ways the world has never seen before. So yeah, thanks.
Much for that, Vaughn. That was very engaging and very encouraging. And I like how you put down some markers for us in terms of making sure that we're not too low in our ambitions, and we see the potential, the massive potential to really do things differently. So thank you for that. Last but not least, I will invite Javanik to also make his initial remarks and also share with us a little bit about himself, the work he does, and also how he thinks about the issue of youth impact and engagement on climate action. Javanik, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. And I'm hopefully going to take a different approach in terms of how I do this whole introduction. But just in a nutshell, of course, like you would have mentioned, me, Giovanni Henry, coming from the island of St. Lucia, of course. And it's interesting in that I think the fact that I've gotten the experience in terms of working with young people, both at the grassroots level, I've done that at the national level, regional, and now working within the multilateral space, I've kind of seen both sides of the coin. So, at one end, you're pushing forward as a young person, but, when you get to the government or the multilateral space, you see the other side of the coin. But interestingly, earlier on today, I'm just having a discussion with someone, and I was asking, we always speak about youth engagement, etc. But what is the ideal goal? What is the ideal target? And why should we rather apply what I call the reverse approach? We're always looking at increased youth participation, etc. But then what is the desired objective? It's like with any project, we're doing, you always want to see, how do you measure success? And that was a basic question about how would we as young people measure success? Is it an ongoing process, etc. Within the whole youth engagement space? And I think that is an important question that, we need to ask going forward as to what are the key milestones. I mean, I always like to use the example from a local context here with St. Lucia having submitted our updated NDCs in January. And one of the key areas which was mentioned in terms of strengthening the whole children and youth component within these NDCs. So even I understand that is a significant milestone. It may sound very simple, but the fact that coming from our first NDCs and now in our NDCs, young people play a critical role in the revision, it augurs well for the implementation process. It augurs well to ensure that young people are actively involved within that space. And I think it's a case that can be replicated in other Caribbean countries and other cities around the world, that you can actually, have a critical role. After all, we know that the NDCs are central to the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement, of course, is central to all climate action, resilience efforts, etc. So if step one, you can actually get young people actively involved, recognition, first of all, within that space, and within that national contribution, you are now better positioned to influence policy. You're now better in position to have an active voice into what resilience efforts, what approach is taken, etc. So in a nutshell, I mean, the youth engagement is always a very dynamic area, I would say. I mean, of course, there are several barriers and challenges, which I assume we'll all get into a bit later on. But definitely, like I said, it's maybe just a time, particularly going now ahead into the significant COP26, look at what would be your intended target. I mean, not only for young people to consider, but also those within the policy space as to what would be the, the intended target. Of course, we talk about 1.5 to stay alive, etc. But then from a youth perspective, what would be our ideal success target? And for that, I think I've gone over time, so I'll stop here.
Well, thank you, Giovanni. I think that was still that was a great introduction, and certainly again setting of a marker, a clarifying of the focus and the focus within the focus in terms of the broader climate action and what we want for youth and perhaps what youth want for themselves. And so thank you for that. And I'm definitely hoping that not only through the questions that I'm about to pose, but certainly the questions coming from the audience, that we'll get to explore some of the points that you've all raised, and also to be able to provide some answers and some leveraging points for going forward. So I'm gonna now open up the floor and shape the discussion a little bit by presenting some questions, and then I'll also be looking to see some questions from the audience and certainly in the Q&A. And so the first question will be for Vaughn. How can youth be more engaged and supported in advancing resilience efforts?
Yeah, thank you. So to explain how we can engage and support youth more, I'll talk about Student NG's theory of change. And though my focus will be on energy, this can be adapted to any other perspective. So our end goal at Student NG is to achieve a sustainable energy future, as energy serves the world's needs in a way that is economically, socially, and environmentally equitable, and does not compromise the ability of future generations to meet their needs. We achieve this by applying our theory of change, which defines the end goal of our organization, is working towards, and then utilizes backwards mapping to illustrate how our organization's work creates conditions for this goal to be possible. And here's what we do to engage and support youth in the resilience effort. We work to empower youth to engage in the energy system and influence change. Critically so, we engage youth in unique programs that empower them to become change agents, and we work with actors within the energy system to create a space for youth to have an impact. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. We provide energy and education aligned with climate science. We do not advocate for particular technologies, policies, or practices, as we encourage young people to learn and identify climate and energy solutions that are most appropriate for their communities. Student NG presents as many perspectives on energy topics as possible and tools for critical thinking, and allows students to draw their own conclusions on how to build a sustainable energy future. We also strive to create meaningful educational opportunities, promote knowledge transfer, and facilitate open debate. We need collaborative, resilient people who are willing to work hard towards the vision, both within the existing system and as entrepreneurs. Our global community of young people will be change agents who are prepared to tackle these problems. We build change agents by empowering young people, educating them, building skills and capacity, and uniting them. Some institutions are also important actors within the energy system in a state of inertia. They need to transform in order to be part of the energy solutions that will shape a sustainable energy future. Part of that transformation is recognition of the need for innovative and collaborative human resources that will design the tools needed for a sustainable energy future. So when institutions include youth voices and agency in their operating model, they are acknowledging that innovative ideas and collaborative solutions are a key part of creating a sustainable energy future. And this empowers those who will be an integral player in the future of energy, and recognizes that youth are capable of working towards and contributing to this future. So we really just need to understand the value of youth and devote resources to youth.
Great. Thank you so much, Vaughn, for that. The next question I'm going to pose to first Janelle and then to Vaughn. And of course, Giovanni, if you want to jump in there as well, feel free. The question is, what are some success stories to share that show the importance and added value of youth engagement in strengthening climate resilience?
Thank
Janelle,
you
if
for
you
the
can go
question.
first. Sure.
Sure. So thank you for the question. So for me, I have seen a host of different kind of youth-led activities happening on the ground here in Jamaica. And I'll just speak to a few of them that I think have, garnered a lot of attention, especially a lot of feedback, positive feedback from the local communities. So the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council is a youth-led organization, and pretty much they recently received a grant to develop climate smart communities. And these climate smart communities are being implemented where the idea of solar lamps are being introduced into communities. And the particular areas that were chosen were areas that are a little bit remote in rural communities. So accessibility is sort of an issue. So what they have done, they have gone in, they have provided solar lamps, they have introduced the idea of recycling for money in the case where, in Jamaica, we have a lot of these sorts of recycling companies where when you bring in your plastic bottles, you are able to, get some cash back as a result. So that's another income earning sort of activity that has been implemented in these communities as well. And then they are promoting just the idea of sustainable living, so conserving electricity, undertaking conservational farming. So that is one initiative that I know that has been quite, innovative in the space, and the communities very involved. So again, the idea of community engagement, of bottom-up development, of co-creation, and ensuring that they aren't left out of the ongoing effort. So that is one that I know has been quite useful and, quite effective on the ground. Another one that is a little bit more targeted to youth is one that I am integral in, and through one of our organizations called Girls Care. And what we have tried to do is to bring mentorship opportunities to young women, not just in Jamaica, but across the Caribbean, because we recognize that, there was sort of a gap where a lot of youth who wanted to get into the advocacy space, but had no clue as to what the first step was, who to contact, how to get involved. So we tried to use the space to target the young women across the Caribbean. We are now almost at the end of the mentorship program. We have been able to bring in advocates from across the world, Kenya, Colombia, all over, to kind of just share their experiences and to kind of share their journey as activists in the space. We have created campaigns. We have had them initiate projects. We've had them execute projects as well. And, just building the next cadre of young women activists in the space. And that has been very well received. We're already receiving funding for a second round, just to show that, there is a need for this kind of capacity building among youth. And, we're seeing where it has been garnering a lot of traction. And then finally, another initiative that has been useful was one that was funded through the Global Green Grants Fund. And it was provided to MAC, which is a youth group based in a more urban space. And what they were trying to do was to tap into this idea of water insecurity. So what they tried to do was to provide infrastructure for youth that were having issues where water was concerned. So we provided the funding, and they were able to provide water tanks, and they were also able to set up like small backyard gardens in the school that contributed to the kitchens as well. So we've seen where, young people have been at the helm of some of these interventions. And because they are the ones who are on the ground, intrinsically involved, and, know what the challenges are, they are pretty much well positioned to be able to tackle some of these challenges, contribute to the solution, and ensure that it's very inclusive. All the actors involved are benefiting, are contributing. And, these are just some of the ways how we see young people advancing action for change, not just through, online campaigns and through, sharing of information, but also effectively undertaking activities on the ground. And, we have been garnering traction. A lot of persons are, looking on and are also becoming active partners. So it's not just about civil society, but we're seeing public and private entities getting involved. And it's been a very wholesome sort of initiative that I've seen across these different projects. So those are just a few of some of them that have been quite useful, garnering a lot of attention. And I know there will be other opportunities for them because, of the success that has come from these projects. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Janelle. Very happy to hear about some of the direct engagements on some specific groups and the focus on water insecurity. We often think about water access as if it's a zero-sum game, but forgetting that insecurity of access is a big thing as well, particularly in this region. I would like to offer now the opportunity to Vaughn to contribute to this. And then Giovanni, if you also wanted to make a comment or contribute to this as well, please feel free. So Vaughn?
Hi. Yeah, so I'll give you all two examples of youth engagement or successful youth engagement stories. And I think I'd like to start off with COI 16, the United Nations Climate Conference of Youth. This is the first time Caribbean youth are involved in this. And the beauty of this system we have right now is we have regional coordinators overlooking all of the countries right now, and each country has two coordinators, Janelle being one of our coordinators for Jamaica. So what makes this so beautiful a system is this is the first time Caribbean youth are having such a powerful voice on a global system like this, a global platform like this, And from just this little ounce of empowerment, they feel they've done so much. One of the examples is Dominican Republic. Our coordinator, Claudia Taboada, she hosted a local conference of youth in her country, and that was a very successful event. It reached a lot of youth. It even got to the government and the news level. There were in so many interviews, and that is just one of the many success stories COI 16 is bringing this year. And there are so many more stories to go as we plan for the conference in October. And more on a global level now, I want to share a success story from Student Energy. And this is from one of our participants from Uganda, Kakembo Brian. He was inspired to start the Waste Energy Youth Project at an Innovation Jam in 2015 at the Student Energy Summit in Bali, Indonesia. And the project was aimed to rally youth to transition East Africa from wood fuel to affordable fuel briquettes and biogas. Initially, Kakembo's initiative engaged over 200 young people with the goal of providing energy for the 85% of Ugandans who cannot afford clean energy sources. And as of 2019, the project has become a fully fledged commercial enterprise with 12 full-time and 4 part-time staff working across production units. In addition to producing and distributing briquette stoves, the WEYE Clean Energy Company also holds training and workshops for women and youth, leading them to be awarded the IF Social Impact Prize. Demand for their technology and products is currently growing faster than their production capacity, a positive indicator that the sustainable energy transition in Uganda is underway. And to close, here's a quote from Kakembo himself. Diversity in education, gender, language, location, origin, culture, and nationality will be a very big advantage to any initiative. In my case, my finance background was helpful in sourcing and managing funds, but every colleague in the initiative plays a unique role. Thank you.
Great. What wonderful set of success stories from both Janelle and Vaughn Xavier. Giovanni, did you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, sure. Just briefly, when you speak about success stories, even from a Caribbean context, I mean, I can just sum it up in literally one phrase, the Caribbean Youth Environment Network, essentially. In terms of the level of engagement that has been, that diverse level of engagement that is, I mean, over the past couple of years, I mean, decades, in terms of bringing young people, actively into the policy space, and there's also coordinating action on the ground, whether it be international coastal cleanup, etc. And of course, we have seen that the young people have moved on. We've been within this organization, but grown in terms of the capacity that they are now actively involved, whether in governments, etc., and shaping national policy. I mean, of course, I can always go back to 2015, where we know the whole 1.5 to Stay Alive campaign and how that really, I think, galvanized, climate action purpose, everything from a CARICOM standpoint, So I think, in a success story, I think there's, from a Caribbean context, you just need to go to using the model of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network and how that has effectively kept young people engaged over the years to actively contribute and to be really movers and shakers of the climate space.
Great. Thank you, Giovanni. I'm going to ask you to continue a little bit by just talking a little bit about what do you see as the priority areas for action to move your country or region forward in its drive towards resilience? What do you think it is that we need to be focused on?
Yeah. First of all, I mean, whenever you speak about priority areas, obviously the whole issue of financing. I think that was one of the options in the poll earlier on. When we look about now, particularly, they have COP, etc., and young people are actively involved in this space. They'll be like, how can young people actually easily access this finance available to support youth-led climate action initiatives. Of course, there are existing funds. Do not get me wrong. I mean, even Janelle can tell you there are existing facilities available. But just like what happens at the national levels, where you have non-accredited entities, etc., and the difficulties in accessing climate finance, these difficulties do exist for young people as well. These difficulties do exist for youth-led organizations. And I think, in terms of looking at the priority of finance, I think this call, particularly going to this decade of urgent action, where we need to have more or less what I call predictable and sustainable finance for youth-led initiative. And I think particularly looking at it from a Caribbean region as a model, which can actually pilot such initiatives, whereby we have the sub-regional facilities available. I mean, of course, we have been a really small island, so the ability to mobilize resources on our own is quite minimal. But we can use the sub-regional entities, that are existing in place, whether it be, CDB, etc., that could actually have dedicated facilities for young people living in that space, that could actually allow them to support the national development objectives through their youth-led organizations, which in fact we know there are a plethora of youth-led organizations. Another area I think of priority, which has to be focused, again, leveraging what is our strength as small islands, which is our human resource. The priority has to be focused on research, and before I say research and development, but I like to say research and innovation. Because I mean, like one would have mentioned an example earlier on, there is a wealth of knowledge within not only our young people, but generally that could actually address several of our challenges we face, whether it be in terms of water, whether it be energy, etc. But there is still that gap whereby, this 22-year-old boy from Barbados, or this 18-year-old kid from Trinidad and Tobago who has this brilliant idea, maybe just saw something on TV or whatnot, and wants to really develop that, wants to really pilot it and scale up to tackle a challenge. But is that easily accessible? It's very few and far between about, where young people can actually, look at how they can advance it. And of course, within this, this initiative where you can actually get technical assistance that will allow, maybe you have this idea which may seem, which may have potential to replicate, which may have potential to scale up, etc. So definitely, I think, and again, we have the institutions. That's why I was saying from the Caribbean context is that we have the institutions available. You have the University of the West Indies, etc. You have the research centers available. But I think just to be an increased priority, and of course, dedicating more resources to research and innovation. And I think in that way, it will make us a little more independent in terms of our leading our own resilience efforts, and not have to depend on the quote unquote developed world to really drive and lead our development efforts. After all, who better to lead our resilient efforts than ourselves and our own indigenous knowledge?
Thank you so much, Giovanni. Vaughn and Janelle, do you want to add anything on this point about priority areas for action where you think really, the rubber needs to hit the road?
I will, in fact, agree with Giovanni about the idea of research, but I would also like to add to that point is that research that is accessible. Because again, we've seen where in other spaces you have research talking about community-based development, about social enterprise and, the importance of it, but the idea of accessibility because they're behind a paywall. So again, how do we access this kind of research? How do we tap into the lessons learned? How do we apply, some of the concepts if it is that the research has been done, but it's not accessible? So again, the idea of doing research, but again, having organizations, whether they be local, public, private, have access, to some of these sorts of results and seeing how they can replicate them. So I'd just like to add on the point that doing research is one thing, but having individuals having access to some of these inputs and findings is also critical to know, how do I approach this, and maybe what sorts of methods are there for me to replicate in my space. So that's my addition to that point.
Great. I see a question in the chat. I guess I will then ask, how do we get past the political wall when our nation's policies, are counterintuitive to our goals? Not sure which one of you would like to take that one, but it's a good one.
This may not be an answer, but this is very much along the lines of where I would have gone with this question. In Trinidad and Tobago, how this system works is rather than when I first spoke for the first question, we talked about our theory of change. It's somewhat a grassroots approach. And Trinidad is more the opposite of that, where it's a top-down system, where all of the decisions are made at a governmental level, and then it's just brought to the general public, it's brought to the youth, and that's how a lot of our decision making is made in Trinidad. So you can see that clearly in even the environmental sector, the environmental government body, which is the EMA, when they're doing their projects, for example, I hope this isn't too much to share, but for example, when they want to do their reforestation projects or their any conservative projects, it comes across as very performative in the sense that they just plan on doing this. They say, hey, this is what's going to happen, and then they do it. The problem here is there isn't a stakeholder meeting. They don't consult the public. They don't consult there's no engagement with anyone who that project is going to be impacting. And where this comes from, this is a very good example of this as well, is that one of those reforestation events is at a mangrove in, which was it? It was in Cuba. Let me not go into specifics. This is Caribbean. So they went to this place and they spent a weekend with the Caribbean Youth Network in our country to collect over 3,000 saplings to plant at this place. And after we were done with the day of planting these saplings at the what do you call it? The mangrove, some of the locals from that community were asking us, what is going on here? And they informed us that in that same area where we planted all those 3,000 saplings is where they park their boats, where they go fishing. So regardless of what happened, those mangroves would not have survived. And this is the kind of action that happens from our government. And just to add to this point, before I even came onto this panel, I asked this question to a bunch of my friends and everyone had the same answer. We need a government reform. We need a system reform. Youth need to be in these spaces. And I think that's really it. We need, from the people themselves, I ask, they want government reform and they want to be in these spaces. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Vaughn. Yes, Giovanni, go ahead.
Yeah, I think let me just jump onto that question. I think I tend to like the political questions, which put me in trouble. But nonetheless, I think it's a question I've been asked several times, and I think the first question is one: why is it that the nation's policies are counterintuitive? I mean, we all sign onto the Sustainable Development Goals, etc. We all sign onto the Paris Agreement, etc. So why is it that nation policies are counterintuitive? And you tend to understand in certain cases. I mean, there are there's no question about it. There are countries which are heavily driven by oil and gas, etc. So there would always be that hesitance to make that transition, which is why I think there's always a need to. How do we sell that just transition, moving from that explorative to that more regenerative economy? And I think, again, that's where a lot of, research and evidence-based needs to come into play. That if, for example, I'm putting forward a case that we need to make this transition, I need to ensure that if we're making this transition, we can ensure employment levels, remain at that level. We can ensure that, this will contribute to GDP and there will not be that loss, and I think that is the fundamental point because, we tend to look at the politicians, etc. as a challenge. But I always say it's a case where maybe we do not put forward enough information. So that is where, I think that is one of the critical ways we can really and truly get over these so-called political walls that would allow, to push that just transition, particularly in countries which are, very much dependent on the non-sustainable resources.
Great. Thank you so much. Janelle, did you want to say something?
Yes, just to add quickly to Giovanni's point, I totally agree because, oftentimes when we think about being sustainable, we think about the fact that, okay, we're going to halt everything in the name of development. So development is going to halt because we're protecting our environment. But we have to ensure that we recognize that there has to be a balance because, we have to continue to provide jobs. We have to continue to create opportunities. But how do we do it in a way that doesn't destroy our natural resources to the point where, we're actually leaving nothing behind for the future generation. So for me, is how do we strike that balance in creating opportunities now without, diminishing opportunities for the future? And another thing that I do recognize where policies are concerned, a lot of them were written so long ago where this whole agenda, the climate change agenda, wasn't as important as it is now. So one of the things that we also need to look at is how do we climate proof our policies? How do we look at what exists and create opportunities for revisiting? Because, there would have been things that would have been developed 20, 30 years ago, and these policies and these plans and, these different acts are still in place. So now that we have climate change at the forefront of our minds, and, it's something that we're actively looking to mainstream in a lot of our activities. How do we climate proof our policies? How do we mainstream gender considerations into a lot of these things? How do we make sure that there's space for youth engagement? So for me, it's also looking at how do we revisit what exists to make it more practical for where we want to be.
Great, Janelle. Thank you. And we've got a question for you. Are you aware of any climate funds, i.e. climate finance, that are specifically available to youth to undertake work related to climate change, adaptation, and resilience?
Okay, so I'm really, really happy for that question because I'm a part of a board that provides funding to youth-oriented organizations. So the Global Green Grants Fund, within that fund, we have what we call the Next Gen Climate Board. And it's pretty much 6 advisors globally. So I'm a Caribbean advisor. And what that board is intended to do is to provide funding to grassroots youth-led organizations. So one of the challenges that have been recognized is that where funding is in fact available, there are lots of criteria that are required. So the group would have to have been registered for a particular time. You would need to, have certain things in place. You would need to have a board. You would need to have all these things. And oftentimes, while we know how important those are for accountability purposes, a lot of groups just don't have that sort of capacity. So this board exists as a space where even if the groups aren't necessarily registered, we can, provide some amount of funding to them to be able to effectively undertake their activities. And one of the initiatives that I had mentioned earlier on the map, their water security project, they had in fact received funding through the Global Green Grants Fund. We recently funded a group in Belize to be able to undertake work as well. And so that's just for the Caribbean. And then globally, there are lots of different initiatives that are being supported. So that's just one that is tailored particularly to grassroots youth-led organizations. I do know now that while this isn't particularly for or earmarked for youth, the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council that I mentioned earlier, they received their funding for their project through the UNDP. And that was through their small grants project. And that was what they used to fund their smart community initiative. So I do know that, while there will be existing entities that, are a little bit more on the side of, being very accountable. So there need to be certain things in place. There are, as I said, boards such as the Next Gen Climate Board that are in fact providing, once, these groups are, I wouldn't necessarily say established, but have shown some track record of doing existing work, then we provide funds to them. And so, yes, those are the funds that I know. And the Open Society Foundation is another space that I know as well that is interested in undertaking work in the Caribbean with youth-led and kind of youth-based organizations surrounding climate change. So these are just 3 of the entities that I know of and that I know have in fact provided support to youth-led initiatives on the ground thus far.
Thank you so much. There's a follow-up. There's a question as follows. How useful is the ESC agreement to the youth in addressing environmental priority issues that affect them? What would you like to see in the implementation of the agreement to see issues of youth being adequately addressed? Any takers? Giovanni, is that you signaling yes? Go ahead.
Yes, maybe I can chip in here. Having been involved with the whole ESC agreement. Of course, recently came into force. So that was actually, I guess you can see a little bright spot, milestone regionally, etc. But definitely, I think even within the whole ESC process, etc., I think young people were essential towards getting, member states ratifying, etc., and getting to that, coming into force. I think I can remember even one time I met an unnamed regional leader in a hallway, and in the conversation I was like, you need to ratify the ESC, and long story short, I think we all know what happened. But anyways, the essential point is, I think, is that, yes, young people, I think it has a significant tool to access to information, etc. I think ESCAZU can really change the whole landscape, when it brings forth the rights, etc., making us look at the issue from a different standpoint. But I think definitely before we can really into the implementation and really, effectively, address the various environmental issues, I think there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of not only explaining, but more or less outreach within and more or less breaking down its cars. I know there is work that has been done in breaking it down and understanding, making it more what I call, friendly, etc. But I think there's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, I always use the typical yardstick. As if I walk down the street right now there and I ask the average 25-year-old, do you know what is a SCAZU? They probably think it's some cartoon or something. So it shows you that there is still, I think, once we can get to that barrier, and I know there is significant work was done, pushing the SCAZU thing. But before we can really and truly get true benefits and addressing it, definitely we need to get more persons on board, particularly from the Caribbean context. I know there's predominantly a Latin America thing, etc., and of course Caribbean came involved. But I think if we can actually take a lead and push what ESCAZU talks about, rights, etc., participation, and that kind of thing, and take it forward. Yeah.
Thank you, Giovanni. There's a follow-up question from the audience. How do we get youth even interested in addressing climate change to begin with? And maybe, Vaughn, you could take this, given some of the, examples you've given before, in Trinidad, and also some of the lessons perhaps that have been learned from student energy, where you've definitely had some clear, tangible impact. So over to you.
Yeah, so this is an interesting question because I think youth are already interested in addressing it. I think it's more because there isn't, like in the Caribbean, there isn't so much space for youth to act. They feel disenchanted. They don't feel enthusiastic to get involved. And many of our spaces to youth, per se, to get involved and to act, they don't lead to any meaningful solutions, meaningful or tangible results, I should say. Let's see, this is pretty tricky to, when it comes to Trinidadian context, because when you look at the University of the West Indies and how lively the community there, the club community, how many clubs there are, how many projects and events go on, it's pretty, it's very disconnected from what actually goes on in the rest of Trinidad, where there's so much potential for change, but you don't really see it. And I think that's really because, like I said earlier, there isn't a space for youth to act. So to get them involved, it's really as simple as finding ways to empower them. This really goes right now, this goes heavily into non-governmental nonprofits in Trinidad and Tobago, and it isn't really supported by the government or any higher power up. And this puts too much responsibility into the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And despite the fact they try so hard to get results, they don't really get the support they need from the top of the system. So it's really hard to answer this one with that. People do want to work. People are passionate. They want change. If you talk to anyone about it, like how Giovanni was saying earlier, if you ask someone about the ESCAZU agreement, they're probably not going to know what that is. But if you ask them, how is the weather getting hotter? How is that affecting you? How is that? How do you feel to go outside and play sports? How is your plants in your house? Are they doing well? Like, they can answer simple questions like that when it comes to climate change, and they want solutions. They're very curious because this is something that impacts their standard of living. They may not know these specific terms, and I guess everyone thrives for a better standard of living, for a really good a good life. And to do that, we just need to create spaces for them to get involved, to empower them, to get their voices heard, not just heard, listened to, so we can get tangible solutions for them. I hope that answers your question, or if anyone else has to add to that.
Well, I think that you gave some good answers, and I think sometimes explaining how challenging and how perhaps we don't always have the right solutions is an answer in itself. So I am sure that the audience appreciates your response. Do Janelle or Giovanni also want to make any inputs or comments on this question as we start to look to wrap up this session? Unfortunately, it's been very rich, but I wondered if you wanted to give any thoughts to this question about what are the things that are working that are getting youth engaged. I mean, obviously, youth are taking the bull by the horns themselves in some ways, but we don't always want to rely on that. So what can we do to enable those who are not sure, who are not sure that their time will be well spent? And hey, there you go, Vaughn. There is a response from the audience member who asked the question saying, you did answer. So excellent. So back to what I was saying. So good stuff. How do we get those who are not sure that this is a good use of their time? How do we make sure of that as well? How do we tackle that issue?
I think one of the things that has been useful in a lot of our campaigns is relating back climate change as a bread and butter issue, as we say in Jamaica. So it's relating it to people's everyday activities, and it hasn't only worked with youth, but farmers, fisher folks. So at the end of the day, you coming to somebody and say, climate change is as a result of increased pollutants in the atmosphere, and that's causing warming. Nobody really wants to hear that. That's very technical, and it doesn't mean much to them. For us, the approach that has been useful is relating it back to things that matter. So as a farmer, climate change is going to reduce the amount of funds that are in your pocket because drought is going to create certain impacts. Hazards that are as a result of a change in temperature are going to reduce your yields and stuff like that. So for us, the approach that has been taken is relating it back to things that people consider important. So for the youth, we have to make the connection between their future, between prospective jobs that they're interested in, and then showcasing why they need to want, to have a say in a lot of the ongoing conversations where climate change is considered. For example, if for youth, a huge challenge for them is not being able to have adequate access to, say, water during a drought, for example, then we have to make sure that they're able to relay these sorts of concerns so that their considerations are, taken into perspective when different solutions are being geared to. I mean, for us, it's being able to have a say and being able to contribute to things that are going to benefit you in the long run. Because at the end of the day, persons are making decisions on your behalf. They're making decisions that will affect you. And if you don't let them know what your concerns are, if you aren't able to have a say in, what goes into the planning and how things are executed, then when things don't go your way, or if things don't favor, at the end of the day, if what is done isn't favorable, then you have no one to blame because you did not actively engage, you did not allow your voice, you didn't share your experience, you didn't say, we think you need to consider this. So for me, it's linking back climate change to things that people care about and letting them know that the only way we are going to tackle this is if we take a collective approach and you let people know what your concerns are and you let them know that, I think this is how we need to move forward so that your considerations, your thoughts, your opinions are given consideration. And so that you can say, well, at least I contributed to, something that has been implemented. So for me, it's really about inclusion and ensuring that your voice is heard so that when, things come on board, you can say that you contributed to what has happened.
Thank you so much for that, Janelle. I think that will also help in terms of how we can engage further and encourage some of our youth activists, existing and budding, to join the fight and to join the action. Giovanna, I don't know if you want to make any last remarks, and I will then wrap up the session. We've got 1 minute officially to go.
Just really quickly, I always like to end this message. The 3 Bs in terms of taking climate action forward. 1, you need to break down the language. I think that is essential in terms of getting more persons on board. 2, we need to bring forth the positive outcomes, the positives to be derived into both economically, socially, etc., from positive climate action. And of course, the final one, which I think we all can play a critical role in both whatever organization you are involved with, bridging that gap between all stakeholders involved. So whether it be young people and government, whether it be through governments and funding agencies, multilateral agencies, etc., marginalized groups. So I think definitely bridging that gap. So it's what did I say? Bring forward and bridging that gap. I think I want to end on there. And of course, maybe just one thing I would like to encourage persons, of course, as we head over to push towards COP26 and increasing youth participation, I would encourage you all to sign the Stay Alive and Thrive petition, which you're coordinating. I hope you don't mind that I just included it in the chat. So hopefully once you're all done here, you can sign the petition. And of course, it's all explained there. And of course, definitely we look forward to future engagement as we take resilience and we advance our economic and social resilience within the Caribbean region and beyond. I think it's in the chat now.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Any last words, like the 3 Bs from Vaughn before we sign off? And Janelle?
I'll start off. So I think Giovanni had a really good closing there. It's like we all should know, climate change, that's our fight right now. That's for us to deal with. And it may be intimidating. It may seem like a lot, but it's very simple. Right now in the Caribbean, there's so much youth movement, so many platforms to get engaged with. Probably, if not on your local level, if you're here, you can start it on your local level. Get like a good place to get started is the Caribbean Youth Environmental Network. Definitely go and Google that and sign the 1.5 Stay Alive petition. Don't feel intimidated. We're here, we're a community. All of us are connected and we're here to work towards one thing, which is a sustainable future. And, you can connect with any of us after here. Just, Google us.
Great. Thank you very much. I want to offer Janelle the opportunity for her last remarks. And thank you very much, everyone, for participating.
Sure, thank you. So Jamaica has a 3 Bs, and it's so interesting because there's also a 3C approach that I want to quickly insert as well.
Oh, wow.
So with climate change, there are these 3 Cs that a lot of us try to adhere to, and it's the idea of communication, collaboration, and cohesion. And I also see, where these 3 things are important. As Giovanni said, communicating climate change is something that we need to always ensure that we tailor to our audiences. Collaboration, again, public, private, NGOs, youth-led organizations. Again, no man is an island, as it always says. And, this idea of social capital and collective action is going to be important. And, cohesion with us, all of us ensuring that we use whatever assets we have, whatever our, individual strengths are, to ensure that we advocate effectively for vulnerable groups, for youth, for women, for individuals who are disabled, to ensure that they are not left out of the conversation, because we have to ensure, that in moving forward, no one is left behind. And so I'd like to close with that as my final remarks this afternoon.
Excellent. Well, I want to say a big, huge thank you to our 3 very dynamic, empowered, and forward-looking panelists who I really think will take us forward in a really good way on climate change. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this afternoon, to sharing your ideas, your perspectives, and also answering these questions. And I hope, like the rest of the audience, really wishing you all the very best, going forward in COP26, but also in whatever you're doing. I think the region needs you, and the region is very blessed to have you so engaged on climate change. I do want to say thank you again to all 3 of you, and also to CYEN for supporting your participation and engagement with this process. I do want to also thank USAID and Environmental Incentives for this, organizing, supporting, sponsoring this initiative. And to just remind everyone that we still have 2 more webinars to go that will take place next week on June 30th. And we hope that you'll be able to join us there. One of them will be focusing on climate finance, and the other one will certainly be also the closing session, and will also be a bit forward-looking and thinking about, after the engagements we've had, where do we go next, and how can we really mobilize. We'll also be discussing some of USAID's specific approaches and support to climate change in the region, which I think will really be pivotal in having that broader discussion of next steps. So thank you again. Thank you for participating in this session and the ones before, and hopefully the ones to come. Thank you, everyone, and have a good afternoon.